Hello again. This is part 12 of the Synagogue of Satan, Footprints in History, and I'll just continue with the further rise of Islam and the takeover of much of the Roman Empire. By this time, the Eastern Roman Empire was known as Byzantium. Byzantium still controlled much of the old Western Roman Empire. It controlled much of North Africa, parts of Spain, southern Gaul, southern Italy, and many islands in the Mediterranean. Byzantium was reverting to the Greek language and culture of the old eastern parts of the empire. It had a big struggle, as I said before, with the Persians. Actually, Khosrow II of the Sassanid dynasty of Persia took over a lot of the Middle East. He actually took Damascus in 613 AD, and he also took Egypt in 619 AD, and he also threatened Constantinople itself by taking the city of Chalcedon on the other side of the Bosporus. There were many Christians and Jews in the Middle East. The Persians would protect many Christian sects, but most of those were considered heretical by the mainstream church of Byzantium. And there were also Greek philosophers that had been rejected by Byzantium as being non-Christian, and the Persians would also protect those. By this time, the Babylonian Talmud was completed, and also the Kabbalah was forming. It was associated with the Therapeutae of Egypt and also the Hermeticists and Carpocratians. It would just collect a lot of the occult knowledge and scientific knowledge of those sects. The Persians had no official policy on Christians, but they did persecute Christians that were clearly connected to Byzantium, and there were some Persian generals that used Jewish soldiers in their armies to torture Christians. Many of the Despasini and Nazarenes also moved east into Babylonia and Persia and also Arabia, but they would mix with the ruling classes in those regions. And if you remember, many of the Nazarenes and Despasini were believed to be zealots during the Jewish revolt against Rome. And there was a small group of the zealots called the Sicarii that were the last holdout against Rome at Masada. The Sicarii were known to be a very ruthless and violent group, always calling for violent overthrow of the enemy. And the Sicarii probably moved east with the Nazarenes and Despasini into Babylonia and Persia, and they probably became known as the Assassins later. As I mentioned before, Byzantium and Persia both fought along with Arab mercenaries against each other, but many of these mercenaries were actually Christians. Byzantium was allied with the Ghassanids. They were a sect of Monophysite Christians. This sect was considered heretical by the Orthodox Church of Byzantium, but they were tolerated because they controlled much of the trade routes across Arabia, and they also occupied much of Palestine, Syria, and Jordan. The Sassanid Persians had a loose alliance with the Lakhmids. They were a sect of Bedouin Christians from Babylonia, and both the Lakhmids and the Ghassanids were a buffer between both Persia and Byzantium. There were other Bedouins further south in Arabia. The name Bedouin just means desert because of their nomadic desert ways. And it's interesting that they are believed to have originated in Babylonia. So here again we have a people connected to that region. The Bedouins of Arabia were mostly pagan, and they had important shrines at Mecca and Medina, which we know would become important later. By this time, Byzantium had another resurgence under the Emperor Heraclius, and by 630 AD, Byzantium had pushed the Persians out of most of Syria, Palestine, and also from Chalcedon across the Bosporus Strait from Constantinople, but both Byzantium and Persia would be exhausted in this struggle. By this time, Muhammad was becoming prominent in Arabia with his religion of Islam. Muhammad was very much acquainted with both Christians and Jews, but most of the Christians that he knew were actually considered heretical by the Orthodox Church, and this explains why the religion of Islam is very similar in many ways to the what were called heretical sects of the Christian Church. It's known that Muhammad's family had connections to Egypt through the trade routes, so Muhammad may have been acquainted with sects like the Hermeticists, the Therapeutae, and the Carpocratians. There's a lot of speculation about who just Muhammad's family was. Some believe that they were part of the Despasini or the Nazarenes or even the Sicarii, and also that they may have been partly Jewish. They also may have been descended from the old Greek dynasty that ruled in Egypt, the Ptolemies. What is known is that Muhammad's family were from the tribe of Hashem and became known as the Hashemites, which would have a lot of influence in the religion of Islam and the Muslim world. It's interesting that Muhammad took over the city of Mecca in Arabia the very same year that Heraclius took back Jerusalem and the Holy Land for Byzantium from the Persians. That's 630 A.D. Now, is that just a coincidence? I'll just list the important conquests of the Muslims after they took over Mecca in Arabia. They took Antioch and Damascus in 635 A.D., Jerusalem in 638, Alexandria, Egypt in 640, Persepolis, Persia, 648. They took over the island of Cyprus in 649, and they had a major naval victory off the center of Byzantium on the Anatolian coast in 655. They took Carthage in 697, Samarkand in 710, and Spain in 711. Now, they had such amazing victories. Was this just because of the power of their armies? And they also had major naval victories. I thought that the Arabs were more of a land people controlling the land trade routes. Was someone helping them at sea? Most of the Christian sects that had been considered heretical by the Orthodox Church of Byzantium found more tolerance and fared better under Muslim rule than they did under the rule of Byzantium. They did have to pay a tax, but they preferred to pay the tax rather than submit to either Byzantium or the Roman Catholic Church. But it's kind of curious why the Muslims charged a tax to Christians. It seems that their religion actually told them to destroy the infidel, anyone that didn't submit to Islam. So why were they taxing Christians? And they also taxed Jews. So here it seems we have history repeating itself. There's now another tax, just like the old Jewish tax that was levied on both Christians and Jews after the Jewish revolt. And no doubt there would be powerful merchant families like powerful Jews of Alexandria that would collect the tax or facilitate the collection of the tax. There was a struggle for rulership in Islam after the death of Muhammad. The majority wanted the leader to be elected, and this would become the Sunni faction. And there was a minority that believed that the leader should be descended from Muhammad. And there was a struggle over his nephew Ali and also his grandson Hussein. This would become the Shiite faction. Most of Muhammad's descendants were killed, and you might wonder if they were Desposini or Nazarenes being hunted down just like they had been hunted down by the Romans much earlier. The Islamic Empire expanded under the Sunni faction of the Umayyads, who ruled from Damascus, which they had taken in 661 A.D. Most of the Arabs would keep to their own tribes, and they would separate themselves from other nationalities. The taxes that were laid on the Christians and Jews were probably collected by Jews so that the Arabs wouldn't have to mingle with the other populations. The Arabs were trying to preserve their old culture, just like the Germanic tribes were trying to preserve theirs in Europe. Most of the Germanic tribes were actually Arian Christians, but they held to that sect mainly because it gave them an identity. Many among the ruling families of the Germanic tribes in Gaul, like the Visigoths and the Franks, were becoming Roman Catholics, just like Clovis, the Merovingian leader of the Franks, had done earlier. And also many in the ruling families were marrying into Jewish families. There were large communities of Jews in Spain and southern Gaul. The Jews had almost complete control of a region known as Septimania, which is also known as Occitania and became known as Languedoc. The Merovingian rulers of the Franks actually had many Jews in their administrations to run their government. The last Merovingian rulers are usually considered as half-witted and incompetent by most historians. Most of their administration and government was actually run by Jews and other Franks, and these are often called the mayors of the palace. These so-called mayors of the palace became known as the Carolingians, and they're usually shown as scheming to take over control of the Frankish kingdom from the Merovingian rulers. The last Merovingian king of the Franks with any real power was Dagobert II. He was exiled for many years in Britain and Ireland. His first wife was actually a Celtic princess. He had a very high education in Ireland with monks that were connected to both Egypt and Byzantium. The Celtic Church of Britain and Ireland came under the authority officially at the Council of Whitby in 664 A.D., but it may be that both churches were still scheming against each other and did not fully trust each other. After Dagobert's first wife died, Wilfrid the Bishop of York arranged a second marriage for Dagobert with the niece of a Visigoth prince of southern Gaul, and Wilfrid arranged to have Dagobert return to Gaul or France. Dagobert returned to Gaul and took back the kingship over the Franks, but in 679 AD he was supposedly assassinated. There are different theories about who did it and why. It may have been the Roman Catholic Church or also the Celtic Church, or it may also have been the Carolingians because they wanted to usurp the Frankish throne. It may be that Dagobert wasn't showing enough allegiance to the Roman Catholic Church, and also that he was showing too much allegiance to the Celtic Church, or vice versa. And also it may be because of his marriage to a Visigoth princess. The Roman Catholic Church may have thought that an alliance between the powerful Visigoths and Franks would be too much for the Vatican. And also they may have suspected Wilfrid, the Bishop of York's motives, that he may have still been working for the Celtic Church and was trying to use Dagobert for the Celtic Church, or that maybe Dagobert wasn't doing enough for the Roman Catholic Church. There's another theory that the Vatican had Dagobert murdered because he was of the Rex Deus families. They might have been considered too much of a threat for the Vatican, but it may be that he just wasn't enough under their control. By this time, many of the ruling families of the Visigoths were becoming Roman Catholics, and they finally convinced the Visigoth bishops also to become Roman Catholic, but the Roman Catholic Church may not have fully trusted the conversion of the Visigoths, and the Visigoths also began to persecute Jews. There were strongholds of the Celtic Church in Brittany on the northwestern coast of France, and also the northwestern coast of Spain and Galicia, and it may be that the Roman Catholic Church wanted to punish both the Visigoths and the Franks for not removing these strongholds from their territories. By this time, the Visigoths only ruled in Spain because they had been pushed there from Gaul by the Franks, and it then appears that the Jews and the Pope both conspired together to bring the Muslims in to destroy the Visigoths in Spain. And this is certainly because the Visigoths were persecuting Jews, and also the Visigoths and also the Franks were not showing enough allegiance to the Pope. So in 711 AD, the Umayyad Caliph of Damascus invaded Spain, and this was certainly with the approval of the Pope and the help of the Jews of Spain and Gaul. The Caliph of Damascus used Berbers of North Africa who had only recently been converted to Islam, and they quickly overran southern Spain. They drove the Visigoths out of their capital of Toledo, but it's interesting that the Jews remained in the city and they seemed to have no fear of the Muslims, and this is pretty much proof that they were actually working with the Muslims. As a side note, the Muslim Berbers of North Africa were called Moors. This name could refer to the sea, so it makes you wonder if the Muslims were connected to another people associated with the sea. That could be the sea-trading Jews, the Syrophoenicians, and Babylonians. So I'll continue in the next part with the further rise of Islam and the papacy, and also the rise of the Holy Roman Empire. So until next time.